Hey everyone, welcome to Art Studio 320. My name is Melanie. I rescue furniture, recreate it, and hopefully keep it out of the landfills. This week's project is an end table I found at a thrift store that met the requirements of one of my customers' needs. This is going to be a combination of some projects I've done in the past, so stick around. My goal here with this piece was to create something completely new, so I had to do some deconstruction. There were a lot of screws on this and a lot of things to take off. Most of it came off fairly easily, even though there were a lot of screws, but there was one issue, small. But this piece I could have sworn was two pieces, and turned out it was all one piece, and that one was not supposed to come off. Luckily for me, there were staples that all I had to do was hammer them a little bit to get them out, and then I put some glue on that little piece of trim, and it had a nice groove in it. It fit like a puzzle, and then I just put a couple clamps on it and we were good to go. This multi-tool is great for small jobs, little things you have to cut off, and it worked perfectly for this. It took a little bit of time, but not that much. There was more wood on this piece than I originally thought, so I was excited to be able to sand that back and get it ready to stain. Along with the other parts that I couldn't, I needed to scuff sand with 120 grit. And then, of course, I went to 220, and this time I went to 400. It really made the difference when I started staining. The stain went on so nicely. It just is so smooth. Try 400. I wanted to use primer on this piece, and I wanted to tint my primer. I tinted it with red, but looking back, I think I would, next time using red, I would tint it gray. Just a color darker than the red, because red is really difficult to cover anyway, so you want to give it a boost. I only wanted one pull on the big drawer, so I had to fill these holes. Now when I use wood filler, I use plastic Wood-X, and when you're filling a hole, you have to build it up. You can't put it all in at once. You could, but you'll be waiting for days for it to dry. So it's better to build it up instead. You'll notice this second coat of primer is a little darker because I tinted it a little bit more. The sides of this piece were not wood either, so I had to scuff sand them in order to paint them. There was a little trim that was wood, so I made sure to sand that all the way. Whenever you are going to have a combination of stain and paint, you want to tape off the areas that you don't want to get paint on. Now, I always paint first and then I stain, because to me, it's easier to get stain off of paint, because if you're using an oil-based stain, you can use mineral spirits to clean the paint. It is much more difficult to get the paint off a stain. You have to sand it and then stain it again. It's possible, but it's easier to paint and then stain. The red I'm using is Cranberry by Fusion Mineral Paint. It is very pigmented, meaning it is hard to cover. You need to plan ahead and make sure you have plenty of paint to use, because it is going to take you more coats. Even with a primer, it's going to take you more coats than usual. I should have used gray. I think it would have been better if I used a gray primer. I had the chance to use my miter saw, and I'm cutting up some dowel rods for the top trim of my end table. And the first round went really well, but then that happened. Some of the dowel rods that were kind of split, that I didn't know were split, really bounced back, and it scared the bejesus out of me. I did manage to get them all cut with a little help from Phil. I was just a little gun shy after 3 times in a row, but I was right back at it the next day. I was looking for a quick way to get these dowel rods painted, so I put a big loop of painter's tape on the table and just added the dowel rods so they wouldn't move around. I created a kind of stain, if you will. I used a little bit of water with this paint, which is already kind of stain-like, and just made it thinner, and then when I put it on, it was kind of like a stain. It just was a wash, and that way it allowed the color to be there with a little wood showing through. And I wanted to make sure that I got the tops and the bottoms colored as well, because I didn't want anything to show just in case someone was looking under there. I like to add little surprises to the drawers once in a while, so I'm putting little hummingbirds on the big drawer. The best tip I can give you is when you're putting the paint on, you want it to be very, very tacky, so there's very little paint, because if you have too much, it's going to bleed. Whenever I stain now, I'm using mineral spirits because it just helps the wood absorb the stain. It just gives it a nicer finish. I wanted to use a stain that was just maybe a hair darker than the natural color, and English Chestnut is what I chose. It's probably a couple shades darker than natural pine, but it really looked so nice with the red. I was really pleased with the choice. Anytime you're putting on more than one coat, which is always, you need to use some finishing pads. And these things are just my lifesavers, really. They just make the paint so smooth. It gets rid of any kind of bubbles or whatever. I wanted to put something a little extra on the top as well. It's a lot of red up there, and I thought something like a mandala would be pretty up here. And I decided when I was putting the paint on that I wanted it to kind of look like powdered sugar. And you'll see in a minute. I think I got that effect, and I really like it. It's not as stark as it would be if I put more paint on. I just really like the way it looked. Takes very little paint to do. After all of that sanding on the raw wood, I was very surprised to see this. When I took the painter's tape off, there was wood that came with it, just splinters of wood. So I had to sand that all down again. That was really crazy. I had never had that happen before. It's finally time to put my little red pegs on the top there. I wanted to make sure they were all the same, so I measured the top to the edge on the bottom there, and then I put a little mark on the miter saw so that every time I cut a peg, it was the same. Okay, Phil cut the majority of this batch, but I did measure it and mark it on the miter saw. I'm not sanding my fingers. I'm sanding a little piece of trim on the edges. I'm making it beveled so it fits on the drawer nicer. If I just made it straight, just a straight cut, it just didn't look right. It didn't look like it belonged. So I thought if I beveled the edges, it would work better. This was something I had to figure out how to add some texture without wasting a lot of dowel rods, because if I had to put one across the whole drawer, I would have had to buy new dowel rods. So I had some fatter dowel rods that I used for the center because that was a big concave area that came out a little farther than everything else. So I made those a little longer. I found the center between the two holes for the hole, and then I put my little piece of trim right in the center. Then I measured from the edge of the trim to where I wanted the dowel rods to end. And that's how I made my cuts. So everything matched. After I got all of the dowel rods cut, I checked to make sure they all matched, and then I was able to stain them and glue them down. After the legs were finally dry, I was able to put them on the bottom. I had to sand a little bit on the edges where I cut because it wasn't quite even. I wanted to make sure that that was nice and flat, so I sanded that with some 80 grit because I didn't really care how it felt, it just needed to be flat. The spray paint I used to paint the legs was Bare Premium Metallic, and the color was Champagne Gold, and it's a matte finish. I'm not sure how I feel about it. The jury's still out. I'll let you know. It took a long time to dry. Like the next day, it was still tacky. And that is disappointing to me because I need to be able to move. So we'll see. I'll give it another shot. One last thing, I just wanted to add a little trim to the bottom where I cut, just to make sure that it was nice and clean. Well, friends, we've come to the end of another project, and I am thrilled with these results. I am so thrilled. I love the texture on this piece. I love the wood parts. I was afraid there wasn't going to be any wood to show, but there is. So I think my customer is going to be really happy about that. And overall, I really like it. I was not sure about the hardware before I actually put it on. How can you go wrong when it's smiling at you? I mean, it's happy, so I'm happy. Everything came together, and I'm really happy. I can't wait to send a picture to my customer. I think she's really going to like this. I put a couple extra little surprises on the drawers. I always like to do that. I don't do it all the time. I'm going to put some drawer liners in the drawers just to spruce it up a little bit. Just a little extra something. Thank you for being here. Good luck on your next project. See you next time.
You can do it.
I'm breaking down like the rain, like my worries on a windy summer day. What I sense, it's all the same. Can you help me? Can you help me feel okay? Take me out there, your golden wings. I need you, I'll bleed too. Kiss me gently on my forehead. I need you, I'll bleed too.
Hey, thanks for watching my video. You can find more videos just like this on my YouTube channel. And don't forget to subscribe.